In December 1991, Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine signed an agreement that effectively dissolved the Soviet Union. The Kremlin believed cheap gas supplies would keep Ukraine in its orbit. But things turned out quite differently. While Russia and Belarus formed a close alliance, Ukraine was slowly moving into the arms of the West. Russia was closely following what was happening in Ukraine, but it was not enough to ignite a conflict between the two sides during the 1990s. Moscow seemed uninterested because the West had no intention of incorporating Ukraine into its sphere of influence. But Russia itself was also economically devastated and preoccupied with its wars in Chechnya and the aftermath of the post-Soviet Union. Then in 1997, Russia and Ukraine signed the Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation and Partnership, also known as the Great Treaty. Moscow recognized Ukraine's official borders, including Crimea, home to Russia's ethnic majority with this agreement. The first major diplomatic crisis occurred between the two sides with the presidency of Vladimir Putin. In the fall of 2003, Russia unexpectedly began building a dam in the Kerch Strait near the island of Tuzla in Ukraine. Kyiv saw this as an attempt by Russia to redraw the national borders, and the dispute was only resolved after a face-to-face meeting between the two presidents. The construction of the dam stopped, but cracks began to appear in the friendly facade offered by the two sides. Tensions escalated during the 2004 presidential election in Ukraine, as Moscow threw all of its weight behind the pro-Russian candidate, Viktor Yanukovych. The country's Orange Revolution prevented him from taking office by declaring the elections rigged, and the pro-Western candidate Viktor Yushchenko became president. Russia responded by cutting off gas shipments to Ukraine in 2006 and 2009, as well as stopping gas supplies to the European Union. In 2008, then U.S. President George W. Bush supported the idea of including Ukraine and Georgia in NATO, despite protests from Russian President Vladimir Putin, whose government did not fully accept Ukraine's independence. Germany and France thwarted Bush's plan, fearing that support for Ukraine's membership would disrupt relations with Russia. At the time, NATO Secretary General Joop de Hoop Scheffer said that the alliance needed to develop a new long-term strategy, including improving dialogue and cooperation with Russia. At the NATO summit in Bucharest, Romania, accession was discussed, but no timetables were set for the start of the process. Because things did not go well with NATO, Ukraine made another attempt to strengthen its relations with the West with an association agreement with the European Union. The government of the then-elected president in 2010, backed by Russia, Viktor Yanukovych, announced the freezing of the agreement, and then signed with Putin an agreement to lend Ukraine $15 billion in financial aid and a 33% discount on natural gas prices. The signing of the institutes was met with massive and ongoing protests in Ukraine that almost led to the outbreak of a civil war. In February of the following year, the Ukrainian president fled to Russia. The Kremlin took advantage of the power vacuum in Kyiv and annexed Crimea in March 2014. That operation was a turning point in the relations between the two countries and the beginning of an undeclared war. At the same time, Russian paramilitary forces began mobilizing for an uprising in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine and established people's republics led by Russia. The government in Kyiv waited until after the May 2014 presidential elections to launch a major military offensive called counterterrorism. In June 2014, newly elected Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko met on the sidelines of the 70th anniversary of the Victory Day celebrations in Normandy with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. The meeting, later known as the Normandy Format Talks, was mediated by Germany and France. At about the same time, the Ukrainian army was able to repel the separatists, but at the end of August, according to Kyiv, Russia intervened militarily. Moscow denied this. Ukrainian units suffered a major defeat, and the war ended in September with the signing of a ceasefire agreement in Minsk.